And so to dramatize this further, suppose we could assume we could send him at almost the speed of light, say 99.99% speed of light. 4.5 light year trip, round trip would be 9 years. On our clock, on his clock, it would be 33 days. So that gives you a feeling for, it should help you understand that time is not an absolute, it's variable. It's not uniform. Time is a physical property. It varies with mass, acceleration, and gravity, among other things. And this is an insight that is profoundly useful as we approach some of the subjects we're going to talk about in this study. You and I, we now know, exist in more than 3. In fact, the experts tell us we live in 10 dimensions, more than 3. See, all of us think of time as being linear. When we were in school, the teacher went to the blackboard and wrote a line, starting at the left and going over to the right. And the left end of the line was the birth of a famous person, the founding of an empire, what have you. And the right end of that line would be the death of that person or the fall of that empire. All of us have made timelines in school. Well, because of that background, it's natural for us when we encounter the concept of eternity, we tend to jump to the conclusion that it's sort of like a line that starts at infinity on the left and goes to infinity on the right. In other words, we think of eternity as having lots of time. Well, that's good poetry. It makes a nice verse in Amazing Grace, the 4th verse and what have you. But it's bad physics. Because, let me ask you a question. Is God subject to the restrictions of mass or acceleration or gravity? Hardly. He is not simply somebody with lots of time, as we tend to imagine eternity, but he is outside dimensionality of time altogether. And that is his uniqueness, and he uses that to authenticate his messages to you. That's what Isaiah means when he says, "Thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity." Since God has the technology to create us, he certainly has the technology to get a message to us. The challenge is, how does he authenticate his message? How does he let us know that the message is really from him and not some kind of contrivance or a fraud of some kind? Well, one of the ways he authenticates it, there's several ways. One of the ways, he declares the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done. In other words, he writes history before it happens. We call that prophecy. Many people ask me, "Chuck, what's your profession?" I say, "I'm a history teacher. I teach history in advance." And of course, I'm being only a little bit facetious there. The geometry of eternity, if I take this line that we have on the screen here, and if I bring it out to you in 3 dimensions. Imagine this curved line is coming out at you from the screen. It's a line. And we are at a point in this line that we'll call the present. Behind us is the past. Ahead of us is the future. For us, life is a sequence of events. And we can move forward and look back. We can't look forward or move back, but that's a whole other discussion for another time. For someone who is outside the dimension of that linear length of time, say an eternity, that person that's outside that line can see the past, the present, and the future simultaneously. Let me give you an analogy. Suppose you're watching a parade, the Rose Parade, at the first of the year or whatever your hometown might have. For you, as you're sitting on the curb, around the corner comes the marching units, the bands, the floats, the whatevers. For you, the parade is a sequence. They come around the corner, they go by you, and they go around the next corner. So that's like life is. It's a sequence. But for someone who's not in the plane of that parade's existence, say in a helicopter above the parade, they can see the staging area where all the floats are getting prepared, ready to start. They can see the whole parade route, and they can also see the other end where they disband. They can see the beginning and the end simultaneously. A clumsy analogy, but it gets the idea across, I think. My favorite quote from Dr. Einstein says, "People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between the past, the present, and the future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." And indeed it is. So the point I want to get across with all this is important for you to really understand that the nature of time, it's a physical dimension, and it varies with mass, acceleration, and gravity. There's a footnote I'd like to add here a little bit about some architecture. I'm obviously using a computer here that consists of microcircuits and a memory and all kinds of hardwire, wires and resistors and all kinds of electronic parts. And it also, inside the computer, is software. There's an operating system, There's all kinds of languages and messages going around and so forth. If you knew everything there is to know about every piece of hardware in this computer, could you predict its behavior? And the answer, of course not. It's simply an environment within which the software operates. Its behavior, how it responds to things, is a function of the software that's in it. Now, let's talk a little bit about software. You see, the physical equipment is equivalent to like our physical bodies, our flesh, bones, our circulatory systems, and all of that. But that's all what I'll call hardware. Our real self, call it soul, spirit, mind, thoughts, whatever, we use those words pretty loosely. As I look out at the audience here, my frustration is I can't really see you. It's not because the lights are so bright. I can't see you because I can only see the temporary residences that you're in. The real you, as I say, call it soul, spirit, what have you, that's vocabulary, is software, not hardware. Now here's the point. Let's talk a little bit about software. If I take a little diskette, you all have seen one of these little diskettes in our current computer age. If I take a blank cassette and put it on a postal scale, it will weigh about 7/10 of an ounce. But if I load that blank cassette, I've spent hundreds of dollars and load it with 1,000,000 bytes of software, and then put it on a postal scale, what will it weigh? 7/10 of an ounce. In other words, software has no mass. A light switch weighs the same whether it's on or off. It carries one bit of information. But a computer register is the same thing. The information in it doesn't have weight. It has no mass. In fact, I can even send it through the airwaves. The big thing today is wireless, because these messages do not require embodiment. They can exist on their own right. So software has no mass. Now, what does that mean? If time is a physical property and software has no mass, it has no time dimension. What that really means is the real you is eternal, whether you are saved or not. The issue is, where are you going to spend it? If you're perfect, you can spend it in the presence of our Creator. If you're not, He has other plans. So we need to understand that. I want to talk also a little bit more about hyperspaces. That's just a fancy word mathematicians use for spaces of more than 3 dimensions. And most of us have been brought up in school with what we call Euclidean geometry. But one of the most important lectures in mathematics was given on June 10th of 1854 when George Riemann invented a thing called metric tensors. It took 60 years until Einstein could use that mathematics to develop his 4-dimensional space-time that underlies the theory of relativity. Einstein went to his death frustrated because he couldn't resolve some other issues which, if he'd gone to another level up, they would have yielded. And Kaluza and Klein did that in 1953 by using more than 4 dimensions and reconciled light and supergravity in the field of physics. And in 1963, Yang and Mills, another duo, resolved electromagnetic and both the weak and strong nuclear forces by recognizing the additional dimensions. And since about 1984 onwards, people in that deal in these things are now exploring the apparent reality of superstrings. That we begin to understand we live in 10 dimensions. And I always find that rather interesting, because there's an ancient Hebrew sage by the name of Nachmanides who wrote in the 12th century. Nachmanides, by simply studying the Hebrew text of Genesis chapter 1, concluded that the universe has 10 dimensions. In his vocabulary, only 4 were knowable. The other 6 were, in his terms, not knowable. I find that rather interesting, because we've spent millions of dollars on atomic accelerators that have caused particle physicists to conclude that we live in 10 dimensions. 4 are directly measurable, the 3 spatial dimensions we know in time. 6 are curled in less than 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and thus are inferable by only indirect means. And I think that's fascinating, that the leading frontier of quantum physics is now caught up to where Nachmanides was in the 12th century. But there are only 2 kinds of people that seem to be able to deal comfortably with hyperspaces, spaces of more than 3 dimensions. And that's mathematicians with special training and small children. If I was going to try to communicate to you aspects of 4-dimensional or 5-dimensional space, we'd both be having a tough time, because it's outside our direct experience.